The wagon wheels groaned against the rutted trail as dawn broke over the Colorado Plateau in 1883. Rebecca Wynn clutched her worn carpetbag tighter, the frayed ribbon tied around its handle the only bright thing about her appearance. Her boots, cracked and dusty from countless miles, barely held together at the seams. The driver had warned her that High Hollow Ranch was the last stop before nowhere, and looking at the endless expanse of sage and rock, she believed him. The wind cut through her thin coat like a blade, carrying the scent of dust and distant snow from the mountains. She'd paid her last coins for this ride, staking everything on a hastily written advertisement she'd seen in Denver. Ranch hand needed, room and board provided, no questions asked. That last part had decided her. Questions were luxuries she could no longer afford. The ranch house appeared like a mirage through the morning haze, weathered wood gone silver with age. A porch that sagged at one corner, and smoke rising from a stone chimney. It wasn't much, but after Los Alamos, after everything, it looked like sanctuary. Boone Mercer stood on the porch steps as the wagon approached, his silhouette dark against the pale morning sky. He was tall and lean, worn down to essentials like everything else in this harsh country. His face was all angles and shadows beneath a hat that had seen better decades. When he spoke, his voice carried the rasp of a man who'd forgotten the taste of easy words. "You the one about the job?" Rebecca stepped down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the journey. "Yes, sir, Rebecca Wynn." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her city clothes and soft hands. She didn't flinch under his gaze, didn't lower her eyes or offer explanations. She'd learned that showing weakness invited wolves. "Can you cook?" "Yes." "Clean?" "Yes." "Handle the quiet?" That question caught her off guard. She met his eyes gray as winter clouds. "I prefer it." Something shifted in his expression, too subtle to name. He nodded once, turned, and walked into the house. Rebecca understood she was hired. The kitchen was a monument to neglect. Dust coated every surface, and the stove looked like it hadn't seen a proper cleaning in months, maybe years. Rebecca set down her bag and got to work without being told. She found water in a barrel by the door, wood stacked haphazardly by the stove, and coffee beans in a tin that rattled with emptiness. By the time Boone returned from wherever men like him went in the early morning, she had coffee brewing and was kneading dough for biscuits. The familiar rhythm of domestic work settled her nerves. These were tasks that made sense, that had clear beginnings and endings. He paused in the doorway, watching her work. She felt his presence but didn't acknowledge it. Men often needed to observe before they could accept. Finally, he crossed to the table and sat down, the floorboards protesting under his weight. She poured coffee into a chipped mug and set it before him. Black. No sugar, she'd found none in the pantry anyway. He wrapped his hands around the mug like it was a lifeline. "Been some time since anyone cooked here," he said, more to the coffee than to her. Rebecca shaped the biscuits and said nothing. She'd learned the value of silence in Los Alamos, where words could be twisted into weapons. Here, silence felt different, not a shield, but a shared understanding. An old dog appeared from somewhere deeper in the house, moving with the careful dignity of age. Its eyes were clouded with cataracts, and it kept its distance, settling near the stove but not too close to her. "That's Copper," Boone said. "He don't trust easy." "Smart dog," Rebecca replied, sliding the biscuits into the oven. The morning passed in quiet routine. She cleaned while the biscuits baked, swept floors that hadn't seen a broom in ages, and took inventory of the meager supplies. Boone disappeared again after breakfast, leaving her to explore her new domain. The ranch was hanging on by its fingernails. The well pump wheezed with each stroke, promising water but threatening to give up the ghost. The chicken coop door hung crooked, and the tools in the barn were more rust than metal. Everything spoke of a place that was surviving rather than living. Through the kitchen window, she watched the landscape an artist's study in browns and grays, punctuated by the stubborn green of sage, the sky pressed down like an iron lid, heavy with clouds that promised nothing. In the distance, a rooster's crow echoed across the emptiness, a lonely sound that seemed to emphasize the isolation. As afternoon wore on, she found a wash basin and hauled water to heat. Her few belongings barely filled one drawer in the small room off the kitchen, a space that might have been a pantry in better times. She sat on the narrow cot and finally allowed herself to think about what she'd left behind. Los Alamos, the grand house with its polished floors and crystal chandeliers. The man with soft hands and sharp eyes who'd promised her security in exchange for her dignity. Who'd told her things about herself that she'd almost started to believe. Worthless, unlovable, lucky to have his attention. The memory of his words still burned. No decent man would want used goods like you. She pushed the thought away and mended a tear in her dress by candlelight. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows in their frames. This place might be falling apart, but at least here she could breathe without permission. Boone returned as darkness fell, moving through the house like a ghost. She'd left a plate warming on the stove beans and cornbread. Nothing fancy, but filling. He ate in silence at the kitchen table while she sat by the stove, continuing her mending. Neither spoke. The only sounds were the pop of wood in the stove and the wind testing the walls, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the quiet of two people who understood that words weren't always necessary, that sometimes just existing in the same space was enough. Later, she heard him in what must be his bedroom, the creak of a drawer opening and then closing quickly, as if he'd thought better of whatever he'd meant to do. She recognized the sound of someone living with ghosts. In her small room, Rebecca pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and listened to the house settle around her. Every building had its own language. The fancy house in Los Alamos had whispered lies and threats. This one groaned and sighed like an old man with aching bones. But at least it was honest about its pain. She woke before dawn, as she'd trained herself to do. Better to be up and useful before anyone could find fault. The kitchen was cold, but she soon had the fire going and coffee brewing. Outside, the first gray light revealed frost on the grass, delicate as lace. Boone appeared in the doorway, fully dressed as if he'd never slept. They nodded to each other, a greeting that required no words, and fell into what would become their pattern. Coffee, breakfast, and the quiet understanding of two people who'd learned that survival sometimes meant simply getting through each day. As the sun climbed higher, burning off the frost, Rebecca noticed something she'd missed the day before. In the corner of the kitchen, partially hidden behind a flour sack, sat a small pot with a withered plant. She couldn't tell what it had been, but someone had once cared enough to bring something green into this brown world. She watered it carefully, not knowing if it was past saving, but unwilling to give up without trying. Behind her, she heard Boone's footsteps pause, then continue out to begin his day's work. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of distant rain that might or might not reach them. Rebecca returned to her tasks, cooking, cleaning, creating small pockets of order in the chaos. She was here now, for better or worse, and for the first time in longer than she could remember. That felt like enough. Through the window, she watched Boone's distant figure moving among the cattle, a dark speck against the vast canvas of the high desert. Two shadows, two silhouettes, maintaining their careful distance but sharing the same harsh light of this unforgiving land. The spring rains came sudden and fierce from the mountains, catching Rebecca off guard as she wrestled with the clothesline. The rope, already frayed from years of weather, snapped under the weight of wet fabric. Boone's work shirts took flight like white flags of surrender, whipping across the grassland in the howling wind. Rebecca ran after them, her skirts heavy with mud, boots slipping on the wet clay. She'd nearly caught one shirt when her foot found a hidden rut. The world tilted, and she was falling, certain she'd land face first in the muck. Then a calloused hand caught her wrist, pulling her upright with surprising gentleness. Boone stood there, rain streaming off his hat brim. one of his shirts clutched in his other hand. For a moment they were frozen, her wrist in his grip, both of them soaked through and breathing hard. Then something unexpected happened. The corner of his mouth twitched upward, and a sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. Rebecca found herself laughing too, a short burst of surprise at the absurdity of it all. Here they were, two grown people chasing laundry through a thunderstorm like children. The sound felt foreign in this house that had known too much silence. He released her wrist and handed her the rescued shirt without a word. They walked back to the house together, gathering what clothes they could salvage. In the kitchen, he produced a clean towel from somewhere and offered it to her before disappearing to change his own soaked clothes. The next morning brought a subtle shift. Copper, the old dog who'd kept his distance, shuffled over to where Rebecca kneaded bread. He settled at her feet with a weary sigh, close enough that her skirts brushed his fur. She hummed softly, an old tune her mother used to sing, and felt the dog's breathing slow into sleep. Boone noticed. She caught him watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable, but he didn't call the dog away. Didn't comment on the small betrayal of loyalty. He simply collected his coffee and headed out to his work. Rebecca found herself noticing things about the house she'd overlooked before. The drawer that stuck in the kitchen table, requiring a special wiggle to open. The window in the parlor that wouldn't close properly, letting in whistles of wind. Small broken things that spoke of a home slowly coming apart at the seams. She fixed what she could. The drawer just needed its runners waxed with a bit of soap. The window required patient adjustment and a folded piece of leather to hold it tight. She polished the glass until sunlight could find its way through years of grime, making small rainbows on the dusty floor. It was while cleaning the parlor that she found them a pair of women's gloves tucked behind a cushion. Lavender kid leather gone stiff with age. She held them for a moment, understanding flooding through her. The withered plant in the kitchen, the neglected domesticity, Boone's careful distance. This house had known a woman's touch before. She placed the gloves back where she'd found them and said nothing. That afternoon, a package appeared on the kitchen table while she was in the garden. Brown paper tied with string, no note attached. Inside, wrapped in tissue, lay a pair of boots. Not work boots like her old ones, but soft leather meant for a woman who might walk somewhere besides from stove to garden and back. Rebecca ran her fingers over the leather, feeling the craftsmanship. They were practical but not purely utilitarian. Someone had thought about comfort, about fit, about a woman's needs. She tried them on and found they fit perfectly, as if he'd studied her worn boots and made careful calculations. At dinner, Boone mentioned casually, "Can't have you breaking an ankle in those old things. Ranch is dangerous enough." She met his eyes across the table. "Thank you." He nodded and returned to his meal, but she caught him glancing at her feet, now clad in the new boots. There was something almost like satisfaction in his expression. That night, she heard him in his room again, the drawer opening. This time it stayed open longer. She heard the rustle of paper letters, perhaps, and then a long silence before the drawer closed again. She wondered what ghosts lived in that drawer, what memories he visited in the dark. The next morning, she found something else. A silver hair comb shaped like a columbine flower, Colorado's hardy wildflower that bloomed despite the harsh conditions. It sat beside her breakfast plate, catching the morning light. No explanation, no ceremony, just the quiet offering of something beautiful in a world that had little room for beauty. Rebecca picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of what wasn't being said. This hadn't come from town. This had come from that drawer, from that past she wouldn't ask about. She pinned it in her hair and went about her morning tasks, feeling the subtle weight of it, the way it caught the light when she moved. Boone said nothing, but she noticed how his eyes lingered on the silver flower before he headed out to check the fences. The day grew warm, one of those false summer days that spring sometimes offered before pulling back into cold. Rebecca opened windows to air out the winter staleness, beat rugs in the yard, and felt something like contentment settling in her bones. She was hanging the freshly washed curtains when Boone returned unexpectedly. Favoring his left side, a young bull had caught him against a fence post. He explained tersely, "Nothing broken, just bruised ribs that made breathing an adventure." Rebecca guided him to a chair and fetched the medical supplies without fuss. He sat rigid as she helped him remove his shirt, revealing a torso marked by years of hard work and harder living. The new bruise bloomed purple across his ribs, joining a constellation of older scars. She worked in silence, applying liniment with careful hands. He flinched once but made no sound. This close, she could smell the leather and sage on him, see the silver threading through his dark hair. When her fingers accidentally brushed an old scar near his shoulder, he tensed. "Cavalry," he said quietly. "Different lifetime." She nodded and continued her work, understanding that some wounds went deeper than skin. When she finished, she helped him back into his shirt, her movements careful and impersonal. But their eyes met for a moment, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of trust, given and received. That evening, as he recovered in his chair by the fire, Rebecca did something she hadn't done since leaving Los Alamos. She pulled out a small, worn book of poetry from her meager belongings and began to read aloud. Her voice was soft, uncertain at first, but grew stronger as the familiar words found their rhythm. Boone listened without comment, his eyes closed but his breathing alert. When she reached a passage about wildflowers growing through rock, his lips moved slightly, as if tasting the words. She read until the fire burned low, then closed the book quietly. "My wife," he said suddenly, the words rough as sandpaper. "She liked poetry." Rebecca waited, but he offered nothing more. She understood. Some things could only be spoken in fragments, in the spaces between what was said and what was felt. The days found their rhythm after that. Small kindnesses exchanged like currency extra coffee on cold mornings. A chair moved to catch the afternoon sun. A book left where she might find it. They were learning each other's patterns, the way desert creatures learn to share scarce water. One evening, a storm rolled in from the west. Not the sudden violence of that first rain, but a steady soaking that the parched earth drank greedily. They sat on the covered porch, watching lightning paint the distant mountains. "Beautiful," Rebecca murmured, then caught herself. She'd learned not to admire things aloud in Los Alamos. Admiration could be twisted into obligation. "It is," Boone agreed simply. "This land's got a hard beauty. Not everyone can see it." She turned to look at him, surprised by the longest speech he'd made since she'd arrived. He was watching the storm, but she sensed he was talking about more than weather. "Sometimes," she said carefully, "the hard things are the most beautiful. They've earned their right to exist." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt seen in a way that didn't make her want to hide. His nod was slow, considering. "Yes," he said, "I reckon that's true." They sat in companionable silence as the storm moved across the valley, washing the world clean. In the morning, there would be mud to deal with, new leaks to patch, the endless work of keeping civilization's fingernail grip on this wild place. But for now, they could simply exist together, two souls who understood that survival was its own form of beauty. When the rain finally stopped, stars emerged like scattered silver on black velvet. Rebecca pulled the new shawl when had that appeared tighter around her shoulders. Beside her, Boone's breathing had deepened into near sleep. She thought about the silver comb in her hair, the boots on her feet, the slowly healing plant in the kitchen that had begun to show tiny, green shoots. Small resurrections, she thought. Perhaps that's all any of them could hope for, not grand redemption, but small resurrections, one day at a time. The letter lay on the kitchen table like a coiled snake when Boone returned from town. The seal was crooked, the ink blotchy, and something about it made Rebecca's skin prickle with unease. She watched from the stove as he picked it up, his face darkening with each line he read. "Trouble," she asked quietly, though the answer was written in the rigid set of his shoulders. He handed her the letter without a word. The handwriting was ornate but unsteady, the kind of penmanship that tried too hard to appear official. Roland Haynes, claiming to be a cousin of Boone's late wife, was asserting rights to half the ranch based on a will he'd mysteriously discovered. Rebecca read it twice, her mind catching on details others might miss. In Los Alamos, she'd worked for a lawyer, a drunk who couldn't keep his hands to himself but whose legal documents were always pristine. She'd learned to spot forgeries, false claims, the tiny tells that separated truth from deception. "This seal is wrong," she said, pointing to the wax impression. "And look here, the date. It's written as after your wife's passing, but references her in present tense." Boone studied her with surprise. "You know about such things?" "I've seen enough false documents to recognize one." She didn't elaborate. Didn't mention the forged receipts her former employer had made her copy, or the way he'd threatened to use them against her if she ever spoke up. "May I see the original papers for the ranch?" He hesitated, then disappeared into his room. He returned with a leather portfolio, dusty but carefully preserved. Together they spread the documents on the table deeds, tax records, his wife Clara's neat handwriting on household accounts. Rebecca traced the dates with her finger, building a timeline in her mind. "Your wife passed in November of 1880. "Yes," the word came out rough. "This supposed will is dated December 1880, but the notary seal Jonathan Burgess, I remember reading his obituary in the Denver papers. He died in October that year." Boone's laugh was bitter. "Dead man notarizing from beyond the grave. That's bold, even for Roland." She heard the history in his voice. "You know him. Clara's cousin. Showed up for the funeral, sniffing around like a coyote. I ran him off when he suggested Clara would have wanted him to help run the place." His jaw tightened. "Seems he's found another angle." That evening, Boone rode out to see Charlie Merritt, the only honest lawyer in 3 counties. Rebecca watched him go, then turned her attention to the documents. She copied every date, every signature, building evidence with the methodical care she'd learned from watching legal proceedings from the shadows. The house felt different with him gone. Copper paced restlessly, whining at sounds only he could hear. Rebecca found herself checking the windows, barring the door old habits from times when she'd had reason to fear unexpected visitors. Boone returned near midnight, dust-covered and grim. "Charlie says the papers are clumsy forgeries, but Roland's got himself a lawyer from Denver. They'll push it to court if I don't settle." "Then we fight." The word surprised her. "We," not you. But Boone didn't correct her. Over the following days, a new routine emerged. Morning chores gave way to afternoon strategy sessions. Rebecca organized every scrap of paper that might help their case while Boone reached out to neighbors who'd known Clara, who could testify to her wishes. It was during one of these sessions that Boone brought out a small painting, 2 figures standing before a house, rendered in hopeful, amateur strokes. "Clara painted this when she was expecting," he said quietly. "Never got to finish it." Rebecca touched the canvas gently, seeing the ghost of a future that never arrived. A child who would have played in the yard, learned to ride, grown up with the mountains as backdrop. The unfinished portions seemed to shimmer with possibility. "Seeds can wait a long time to grow," she said softly. "Sometimes they just need different soil." He looked at her sharply, then away. But that night, she found a new ledger on her bed sturdy, leather-bound, meant for keeping accounts. Inside the front cover, he'd written, for the accurate recording of facts, B.M. Roland arrived on a Thursday, bringing 2 rough-looking men who lounged against their horses with practiced menace. Roland himself had the soft look of a man who preferred manipulation to labor. His clothes too fine for ranch country, his smile too quick. "Cousin Boone," he called out, false warmth dripping from every word. "Surely we can discuss this as family." Rebecca stood beside Boone on the porch, her presence drawing Roland's attention. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl, recognizing the type instantly, another man who saw women as possessions to be acquired or discarded. Well, I'd heard you'd taken on help. Roland's smile widened. Though folks in town have other words for it. State your business and get off my land, Boone said flatly. Our land, cousin, or it will be, once the judge sees sense. Roland produced a sheaf of papers with a flourish. My lawyer says Clara always intended for family to inherit, blood family. Clara's intentions are clear in the real will. Rebecca interjected calmly. The one filed with the county recorder in 1879, properly witnessed and notarized by a man who was actually alive at the time. Roland's eyes narrowed. And who might you be to speak of legal matters? Miss... Someone who can read a calendar, she replied evenly. And who knows the difference between authentic documents and desperate forgeries. One of Roland's men shifted, hand moving toward his sidearm. Boone stepped forward slightly, and though he was unarmed, something in his stance made the man reconsider. We'll see what the court says, Roland snarled, the veneer of civility cracking. And we'll see how long your domestic arrangement lasts when the whole county knows what kind of woman shares your roof. After they left, Rebecca's hands shook as she cleared the coffee cups. She'd stood up to him, but old fears die hard. In Los Alamos, standing up had meant bruises hidden under long sleeves, meant being told she was worthless so many times she'd almost believed it. He'll spread poison in town, she said quietly. Let him. Boone's voice was steady. I've weathered worse storms. She looked at him, this quiet man who'd given her shelter without questions, who left small gifts like offerings to a skittish bird. Why don't you ask? Ask what? About before, about what kind of woman I really am. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, I know what kind of woman you are. You're the kind who fixes broken drawers and brings dead plants back to life. Who stands beside a man when trouble comes calling. The rest is your business. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind carried memories, harsh words, cruel laughter. The sound of her own voice saying yes, sir, when she wanted to scream. She rose and found Boone sitting by the dying fire. Clara's last letter in his hands. She told me not to let the house die with her, he said without preamble. I didn't understand then. Thought keeping everything the same was honoring her memory. But nothing stays the same. Does it? Things either grow or they die. Rebecca sat across from him, the fire painting shadows on the wall. Growth hurts sometimes. Yes, he folded the letter carefully. But maybe that's how we know we're still alive. They sat in silence. Two people who'd learned that love could wound as deeply as hate. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the darkness, wild voices that spoke of survival against all odds. The sound didn't seem lonely anymore. It seemed like testament. When dawn came, it found them still there, having dozed in their chairs like an old married couple. Copper lay between them, his head on Rebecca's foot, standing guard against nightmares, both sleeping and waking. The fire had died to embers, but somehow the room felt warmer than it had in years. The church picnic was an institution in Dry Creek, as inevitable as spring branding and autumn harvests. Boone hadn't attended since Clara's funeral, but that morning he appeared in the kitchen wearing a clean shirt, his boots polished to a reluctant shine. Thought we might go to town, he said, not quite meeting Rebecca's eyes. Show Roland, we're not hiding. Rebecca understood what he wasn't saying. This was a declaration, a public claim of respectability in the face of gossip. She smoothed her blue dress, carefully mended so the patches barely showed, and pinned the silver columbine comb in her hair. The road to town was dusty, their wagon wheels adding to the clouds kicked up by other families heading the same direction. Children ran alongside. Dogs barked, and the distant sound of fiddle music drifted on the breeze. It was a scene of normalcy that made Rebecca's chest tight with something between longing and fear. I haven't done this in a while, she admitted. Makes two of us, Boone replied, his hands steady on the reins despite the tension in his shoulders. The churchyard was already crowded when they arrived, blankets spread under cottonwoods, tables groaning with food, children darting between adults like minnows. Rebecca felt the weight of eyes as they climbed down from the wagon, heard the subtle shift in conversation that marked their notice. Mrs. Tilly Grant was the first to approach, her weathered face kind despite the curiosity in her eyes. Boone Mercer, as I live and breathe, and this must be Miss Wynne. Ma'am, Rebecca said quietly, accepting the older woman's handshake. I brought dried apple pie, Tilly announced, as if that settled something important. You two come sit with us. My Herbert's been wanting to talk to you about that bull you're selling. It was an olive branch, publicly offered. Boone accepted with a nod, and they followed Tilly to where a group of ranchers and their wives had gathered. The men immediately pulled Boone into discussion about cattle prices and water rights, while Rebecca found herself among the women. The interrogation was subtle but thorough. Where was she from? How did she come to work at High Hollow? What did she think of Colorado weather? Rebecca answered carefully, offering truth without details, maintaining the dignity of reserve. Some women were kind, like Tilly. Others, like Mrs. Della Fisk, wore judgment like Sunday jewelry. It must be unusual, Della said with false sweetness. Keeping house for a bachelor. People do talk about propriety. People often talk about things they don't understand. Rebecca replied evenly. I find work honest and wages fair. Mr. Mercer has been nothing but proper. Still, Della persisted, her voice carrying to nearby blankets. A woman alone, a man alone. Appearances matter in a Christian community. Before Rebecca could respond, a small voice piped up. Mama says Miss Rebecca is pretty. Little Mary Beth, the pastor's daughter, stood before them clutching a handful of wilting columbines. She thrust them at Rebecca with the determination of a 6-year-old on a mission. These are for you 'cause you're the prettiest lady here. The simple honesty of childhood cut through adult pretensions like a sharp knife. Rebecca accepted the flowers with grave thanks, while several women had the grace to look ashamed. Children see clear, don't they? Tilly observed loudly. No shadows in their sight. The afternoon wore on. Rebecca helped serve food, careful to stay visible but not pushy, present but not presumptuous. She watched Boone from across the yard, saw him actually smile at something Charlie Merritt said. It transformed his face, revealing the younger man grief had buried. Then Roland arrived. He came with an entourage, his 2 hired men, a lawyer from Denver in an unsuitable city suit, and a woman whose paint and perfume marked her profession as clearly as any sign. They made a production of spreading their blanket near the food tables, Roland's voice carrying across the gathering. Surprised to see you here, cousin, he called to Boone. Thought you'd sworn off society? Boone didn't rise to the bait, but Rebecca saw his jaw tighten. She moved closer, not obviously protective, but present. Roland's eyes tracked her movement, his smile predatory. Miss Wynne, isn't it? I hope my cousin pays you well for housekeeping. The pause before housekeeping was deliberate, heavy with insinuation. Conversation around them stilled. He pays fairly for honest work, Rebecca replied clearly. Though I understand not everyone recognizes honesty when they see it. Roland's face flushed. Careful, Miss Slander is actionable. As is forgery, Charlie Merritt interjected smoothly, appearing at Boone's elbow. Speaking of which, Judge Morrison wants to see all parties Monday morning, 9 sharp. The lawyer in the city suit began to bluster about procedures and delays, but Charlie cut him off with the ease of long practice. The crowd, sensing drama, pressed closer. It was then that Boone did something unexpected. He stood, crossed to Rebecca, and offered his arm. Miss Wynne, Would you care to see the church's new rose garden, Mrs.? Patterson was just telling me about it. She took his arm, understanding the gesture. He was claiming her publicly, as a gentleman claims a lady's company. Not romantically, that would have been too much, too soon, but with respect that placed her under his protection. They walked through the gathered families, past Roland's darkening face, past Della's dropped jaw. At the garden gate, Boone paused. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing up to him. Not many would." "I've faced worse than Roland Haynes," Rebecca replied, then caught herself. She hadn't meant to reveal even that much. "I know." His voice was gentle. "Takes one to know one, I suppose." They stood among the roses, hardy varieties that could survive Colorado winters, and Rebecca felt something shift between them. Not passion, not yet, but possibility, growing like the stubborn flowers around them. When they returned to the picnic, the atmosphere had changed. Tilly Grant made a point of introducing Rebecca to other women as Miss Wynne from High Hollow. Herbert Grant discussed the autumn roundup with Boone. Even some of Della's followers seemed less certain of their judgment. As the sun began its descent, families started packing up. Children were gathered, blankets folded, leftover food distributed. Rebecca helped where she could, falling into the rhythm of community she'd thought lost to her forever. Mary Beth appeared one last time, tugging on Rebecca's skirt. "Will you come back next time?" "If I'm welcome," Rebecca said carefully. "Course you're welcome," the child said with exasperation. "You're nice, and you smell like bread." From the mouths of babes, Rebecca thought, hiding a smile. The ride home was quiet, but it was a different quality of silence than the morning. Boone seemed lighter somehow, as if appearing in public hadn't been the ordeal he'd feared. Rebecca held the wilting columbines in her lap, thinking about roots and belonging. "You did well today," Boone said eventually. "So did you." He glanced at her, something warm in his eyes. "Haven't felt like part of things in a long time. Forgot what it was like." "Maybe we're both remembering," she suggested. As they crested the hill that brought High Hollow into view, the sunset painted everything gold and rose. The ranch looked less lonely somehow, more like a home waiting for their return than a fortress against the world. That evening, as Rebecca prepared dinner, Boone brought in the books he'd mentioned to Herbert Grant. They ate quietly, but the silence was companionable. Later, by the fire, he tried reading poetry aloud again. His voice was stronger now, more confident with the rhythms. When he reached a line about beauty in unexpected places, he paused, looked at her directly. This was Clara's favorite. "It's lovely," Rebecca said, understanding the gift of being allowed into this memory. "She would have liked you," he said suddenly. "She always said the ranch needed more than just surviving. It needed life." Rebecca felt tears threaten and blinked them back. "I think she sounds wise." She was. He closed the book gently. "Wiser than I knew to appreciate then." They sat as the fire died down, each lost in thoughts of love and loss and the strange ways life circled back on itself. Outside, night settled over the Colorado plains like a familiar blanket. Inside, two wounded souls continued the slow work of healing, one shared evening at a time. When Rebecca finally bid him good night, Boone called her back. "Miss Wynne Rebecca, whatever Roland says in court, whatever lies he spins, you belong here. Remember that." She nodded, not trusting her voice, and fled to her small room. But his words followed her into sleep, warming her more than any blanket could. Belonging. Such a simple word for such a complicated gift. Boone left for Barlow's post at first light, promising to return before sunset. He needed supplies and wanted to send a telegram to a cattle buyer in Denver. Rebecca watched him ride off, Copper whining softly at her side as if the old dog sensed something the humans couldn't. The day passed quietly. Rebecca baked bread, mended a torn harness, and tried to ignore the unease settling in her stomach. By sunset, Boone hadn't returned. She lit the lamp in the window and prepared dinner, telling herself the business had simply taken longer than expected. Full dark came. Then the moon rose, casting silver shadows across the yard. Still no Boone. Rebecca's unease crystallized into fear. The road from town had its dangers, washouts, wandering cattle, and men who might hold grudges over water rights or court cases. She was debating whether to saddle a horse and search when she heard it hoofbeats, irregular and wrong. She grabbed the lantern and rushed outside. A riderless horse stood at the gate, sides heaving, reins dragging. "No," she breathed, recognizing Boone's mare. Then she saw him, a shadow stumbling along the fence line, one arm pressed to his side. She ran, her boots slipping on the evening dew, reaching him just as his knees buckled. "Horse spooked," he gasped. "Rattler, maybe threw me into the rocks." His shirt was torn and dark with blood. Rebecca supported his weight, half carrying him to the house. Inside, by better light, she could see the damaged ribs clearly bruised or cracked, a gash along his side, his shoulders sitting at an angle that suggested dislocation. "Need to fetch the doctor," she said, already reaching for her shawl. "No." His hand caught hers, grip surprisingly strong. "Storm coming. You'd never make it back. I've had worse." She wanted to argue, but saw the truth in the darkening sky. The wind was picking up, carrying the scent of rain and electricity. A night ride would be dangerous for her and do him no good if she broke her neck attempting it. "Then we do this my way," she said firmly. She helped him to the kitchen table, then gathered what she needed: hot water, clean cloth, the bottle of whiskey kept for medicinal purposes. Her hands were steady as she cut away his ruined shirt, revealing the full extent of the damage. "This will hurt," she warned. "Already does," he managed, attempting humor. She cleaned the wound with careful efficiency, trying not to think about how vulnerable he looked, how the lamplight showed silver scars from other injuries survived. When she had to manipulate his shoulder back into place, he bit down on a leather strap and made no sound, though sweat beaded his forehead. "There," she said finally, binding his ribs with torn sheets. "You'll live. Thanks to you." His voice was rough with pain and something else. "Rebecca, if I'd not come back—" "But you did," she interrupted, not wanting to travel that dark road. "You came back." She helped him to his room, the first time she'd crossed that threshold. It was sparse but clean, dominated by a bed with a quilt she recognized as fine work. Clara's, probably. On the dresser sat a daguerreotype of a young couple, faces serious but eyes bright with hope. Rebecca got him settled, then pulled a chair close. "I'm staying. Don't argue." He didn't, as the storm broke outside. She kept watch, cooling his fever with damp cloths, giving him water when he woke. Sometimes he talked, rambling with pain and exhaustion. "Scared," he mumbled once. "Scared I'd die out there and you'd think I'd left, like everyone leaves." "I'm not going anywhere," she said softly, taking his hand. "Neither are you." His fingers tightened around hers, holding on like she was an anchor in rough seas. Sometime near dawn, his fever broke. He woke clearer-eyed, finding her still in the chair, their hands still linked. "You stayed," he said wonderingly. "I said I would." He studied her face in the pale morning light. "I need to tell you something. About Clara." "You don't have to." "I want to." He struggled to sit up, wincing. "She died having our baby. Both of them. Gone in one night. Doctor said there was nothing anyone could have done. But I've never believed that. If I'd noticed sooner, if I'd gotten help faster." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "You loved her. You did your best. Sometimes that's not enough, but it doesn't mean the love was wrong. For 3 years, I've lived like I died with them, going through motions, keeping the ranch running because I didn't know what else to do. Then you showed up with your worn boots and your quiet ways, and things started breathing again. She felt tears on her cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. "We're both carrying ghosts." "Maybe," he said slowly. "Maybe we don't have to carry them alone." The intimacy of the moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Copper shuffled in, breaking the spell with his need to go outside. Rebecca laughed shakily. "I'll see to him. You rest." Over the following days, she nursed him with a combination of firmness and gentleness that brooked no argument. She read to him, cooked foods that would tempt his appetite, and slowly drew out more stories of his life before grief struck. He told her about meeting Clara at a dance, how she'd been the only woman willing to partner with a tongue-tied cavalry veteran, about building the ranch together, their plans for children and prosperity, about the night everything ended, the doctor's helpless shrug, the double funeral in the rain. In return, Rebecca found herself sharing pieces of her own past. Not everything, some wounds were too fresh but enough. About growing up poor but proud, about accepting a position in Los Alamos with such hope, about the slow realization that her employer wanted more than housekeeping, and the price of refusing. "He told me no decent man would want me after." She stopped, unable to finish. Boone's hand found hers again. "He lied." That night, as she prepared to return to her own room, he caught her wrist gently. "Rebecca, I need to say this while I've got the courage. You're beautiful to me. Not just your face, though that's lovely enough, but your strength, your kindness, the way you've brought life back to this place. You're beautiful in all the ways that matter." The words hit her like a physical blow, crumbling walls she'd built for protection. "Boone, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just wanted you to know, whatever that bastard told you, whatever anyone says, you're beautiful to me." She couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. Instead, she leaned down and kissed his forehead, a blessing and a promise combined. Then she fled to her room, where she cried for the first time in months, not from pain, but from the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she could be worth loving after all. The next morning brought a new rhythm. Boone was well enough to sit on the porch, directing her in tasks he couldn't yet manage. They worked as a team, their communication flowing easier now that truths had been spoken. "Storms bringing early snow to the mountains," he observed, studying the sky. "Will that affect the hearing?" "Might delay Roland if he's foolish enough to wait." He grimaced, adjusting his position. "More likely it'll make him desperate. Desperate men do stupid things." Rebecca thought about Roland's hot eyes, his hired thugs, the way violence had simmered beneath his polished surface. "We should be ready for anything." "We will be," Boone said firmly. "Together." Together. Such a simple word for such a revolutionary concept. Rebecca had been alone for so long, had believed she deserved nothing more. But here, on this struggling ranch with this wounded man and his ancient dog, she was finding something she'd never dared name. That evening, as snow began to dust the highest peaks, they sat by the fire planning for the hearing. But underneath the practical discussion ran a deeper current, the understanding that whatever came next, they would face it as partners, not just in legal matters, but in all the small resurrections that made a life worth living. When the grandfather clock chimed midnight, Rebecca rose to bank the fire. Boone caught her hand one more time. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying, for everything." She squeezed back, letting touch say what words couldn't. Outside, the wind howled its warnings of winter coming. Inside, two hearts began the careful work of opening, like flowers that bloom despite the frost. Boone's recovery came in small victories. First, walking to the porch unassisted, then making it to the barn to check on the horses. Each step forward was hard won, and Rebecca celebrated them quietly, adjusting their routines to accommodate his limitations while preserving his dignity. She'd placed a bench by the garden plot he'd built before the accident, and that's where she found him one morning, studying the earth with intense concentration. planning something?" she asked, settling beside him with her coffee. "Clara always wanted flowers here, columbines especially." He gestured to the bare soil. "Seemed foolish then, growing things just for beauty when everything needed to be practical. Now I wonder if maybe beauty is practical in its own way." Rebecca thought of the silver comb in her hair, the small graces that had kept her soul alive in dark times. "Beauty reminds us why we survive." He turned to look at her, morning light catching the green in his eyes. "Yes, exactly that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. The mountains wore caps of new snow, but here in the valley, autumn still held sway. It was in this quiet moment that Boone reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I've been thinking," he began, then stopped, started again. This trouble with Roland made things clear. Life's uncertain. A man should make his intentions known while he can. Rebecca's heart began to race, but she kept her voice steady. "What intentions would those be?" He handed her the paper. His handwriting was careful, deliberate. It was a new will, properly witnessed, leaving the ranch to her should anything happen to him. But it was the last paragraph that made her hands tremble. "It is my hope that Rebecca Wynne will consent to change her name and status, to become not merely the keeper of my house, but the keeper of my heart, as she already is." "Boone," she whispered. "I'm not asking for an answer now," he said quickly. "Just wanted you to know where I stand, where I hope we might stand. When you're ready, if you're ever ready." She folded the paper carefully, held it like the precious thing it was. "I need to tell you something. About Los Alamos, about why I can't, why it's hard to—" "You don't owe me explanations. But I want to give them—" She took a breath, gathering courage. "His name was Marcus Thornton. He hired me as housekeeper, nothing more. But after his wife died, he started expecting things. When I refused, he made sure no one else in town would hire me. Said things about my character, my morals, made it impossible to stay." Boone's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "The worst part was how he made me doubt myself. Made me believe I was worthless, that I should be grateful for any attention, even his when I finally ran. I thought I'd never—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought I was too broken for anything real." "You're not broken," Boone said firmly. "Bent, maybe. Scarred, definitely. But not broken. Broken things don't bring dead plants back to life or stand up to bullies in courtrooms." She managed a watery smile. "When did you become poetic?" "Must be all that reading aloud." His attempt at lightness faltered. "Rebecca, I meant what I said that night. You're beautiful to me, not because you're perfect, but because you're real. Because you've survived things that would have destroyed others and still have kindness to spare." The kiss came naturally, inevitably not passionate, but profound. A ceiling of understanding between two people who'd learned that love could be both wound and healing. When they parted, both were trembling. "I'm not ready for everything," Rebecca said softly. "But I'm ready for something. For trying." "That's all anyone can ask," Boone replied. That evening, as if to test their new understanding, nature threw them a challenge. A dust storm rolled in from the west, fierce enough to send the chickens squawking for cover and rattle every board in the barn. They worked together to secure what they could, herding confused cattle to shelter, battening down loose equipment, fighting the wind for every inch. Inside afterward, covered in grit and exhausted, they found themselves laughing at the absurdity of it all. Rebecca's carefully pinned hair had come completely undone, and Boone had a tumbleweed caught in his belt. "We make quite a pair," she said, catching sight of them in the hall mirror. "We do," he agreed, but his tone suggested he meant more than their disheveled appearance. The storm passed, leaving clear skies and cooler temperatures. News came from town that Roland had hired additional men, rough types from the mining camps. The hearing was set for the following week, and tension hung over the valley like smoke. Charlie Merritt rode out with updates and strategies. Judge Morrison's fair but strict. He'll want evidence, not emotions. Rebecca, your documentation is excellent. Just present it clearly and don't let Roland's lawyer rattle you. I've been rattled by worse, she said quietly. Charlie grinned. I believe it. Boone, you've got yourself a fighter here. I know, Boone said, his eyes not leaving Rebecca's face. After Charlie left, they spent the evening preparing. Rebecca organized every piece of evidence chronologically, made copies of crucial documents, prepared notes in her careful hand. Boone watched her work, occasionally offering suggestions but mostly just being present. You'd have made a fine lawyer yourself, he observed. Women aren't allowed, she said matter-of-factly. World's loss. He shifted in his chair, still favoring his injured side. Rebecca, whatever happens at the hearing, we'll win, she interrupted. But if we don't, then we'll face that together too. She looked up from her papers. That's what partners do, isn't it? His smile was answer enough. The night before the hearing, neither could sleep. They found themselves in the kitchen at 2 a.m, sharing tea and silence. The lamp cast a circle of light that held the darkness at bay, creating an island of calm before the storm. Are you afraid? Boone asked. Yes, Rebecca admitted, but not of Roland. I'm afraid of hoping too much, of believing this us could really work. He reached across the table, palm up in invitation. She placed her hand in his, marveling at how right it felt. I was dead for 3 years, he said softly, going through motions. Nothing more. You brought me back to life. That's already more than I dared hope for. Everything else is blessing on top of blessing. They stayed that way until dawn broke, hands linked across the scarred table, drawing strength from each other. When the first rooster crowed, Rebecca squeezed his fingers and stood. Time to get ready. We have a fight to win. Yes, he agreed, standing with her. We do. As she turned to go, he caught her hand once more. Rebecca, whatever happens today, remember this is your home, our home. Roland can't change that, no matter what papers he waves around. She lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to his knuckles, a warrior's blessing before battle. I know. Now let's go defend what's ours. The morning sun climbed over the mountains, painting High Hollow Ranch in shades of gold and possibility. Whatever the day brought, they would face it as they'd learned to face everything else together, with quiet courage and the kind of love that grows strongest in hard soil. Roland arrived at High Hollow on a sweltering afternoon, the heat pressing down like an iron. He brought his 2 hired men, their faces hard and watchful, hands never straying far from their sidearms. Rebecca watched from the kitchen window as they dismounted, noting how they positioned themselves, one by the barn, one near the well, strategic, threatening. Copper growled low in his throat, hackles raised despite his age. Boone stood on the porch, rifle hanging behind the door within easy reach, but his hands empty. He wanted law on his side, not violence. Cousin, Roland called out, his voice carrying false warmth like oil on water. Thought we should talk before the hearing, man to man, family to family. State your business, Boone said flatly. Roland's eyes swept the yard, lingering on the window where Rebecca stood. Perhaps we could discuss this privately. Send your help away. Miss Wynne stays. This concerns her too. Does it now? Roland's smile sharpened. And why would my family business concern your hired woman? Rebecca stepped onto the porch, back straight despite the fear clawing at her spine. These men reminded her too much of Los Alamos, of threats wrapped in civilized words. Because I keep the books, she said evenly, and I know forgery when I see it. One of Roland's men shifted, and the movement knocked over a lantern near the barn. Whether by accident or design, Rebecca couldn't tell, but the glass shattered and oil spread across the dry straw scattered nearby. "Clumsy," Roland said mildly, making no move to help as flames caught and began to spread. Rebecca ran for the water barrel while Boone grabbed a wet canvas tarp. Together they fought the fire, beating it down before it could reach the barn proper. The hired men watched with amusement, Roland with calculation. "Accidents happen," Roland said when the last flame was doused. "Shame if worse ones occurred. Ranch work is dangerous." "Get off my land," Boone growled, soot-streaked and furious. "Our land, soon enough. Unless—" Roland paused dramatically. "You could make this easy. Sign over half the ranch, and I'll disappear. Even throw in some cash for your trouble." "No." "Think about it." Roland's eyes found Rebecca again. "Man alone might fight, but a man with responsibilities might think twice." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Rebecca felt her skin crawl under his gaze, remembering other men who'd looked at her like property to be acquired or discarded. After they left, Rebecca's hands shook as she swept up glass shards. "He won't stop at the hearing." "No," Boone agreed grimly. "He won't." They spent the rest of the day reinforcing their defenses, checking locks, moving valuables, preparing for siege. As night fell, neighbors began to arrive. Word of the fire had spread, and the community responded as frontier communities did with presents. Elias Grant brought his eldest son. "Heard you had some trouble." Tilly Grant came with food and her sharp tongue. "Roland Haynes always was trash. His mama knew it, God rest her." By full dark, half a dozen men were positioned around the ranch. Not a mob, but a statement High Hollow had friends. "This isn't your fight," Boone told them. "Hell it isn't," Herbert Grant replied. "Man threatens one of us, threatens all of us. That's how it works out here." Rebecca moved among them with coffee and gratitude, touched by this show of support. In Los Alamos, she'd been isolated, cut off from help. Here, community meant something. The night passed tense but quiet. At dawn, the neighbors dispersed with promises to return if needed. Sheriff Rusk arrived as they were preparing for town, his weathered face grim. "Roland's men lit out during the night," he reported. "But Roland's still here, still pushing for the hearing. Judge wants to see everyone in 2 hours." The ride to town felt both too long and too short. Rebecca had all her documents in order, her arguments prepared. But courtrooms held bad memories, places where men's words carried more weight than women's truths. The courthouse was packed. News of the dispute had drawn spectators like flies to honey. Roland sat with his Denver lawyer, looking confident despite his thug's absence. Rebecca recognized the type men who believed their wants were rights, who took what they couldn't earn. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Morrison was younger than Rebecca expected, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He established order quickly, cutting through the lawyer's flowery opening statements. "Let's see these documents," he said briskly. Rebecca presented her evidence methodically, the original will, properly witnessed and filed, tax records showing continuous payment, Clara's own letters discussing the ranch's future. She pointed out the discrepancies in Roland's documents, the impossible dates, the dead notary's seal. Roland's lawyer tried to discredit her. "What qualifications does this woman have to analyze legal documents?" 3 years working for attorney Marcus Thornton in Los Alamos," Rebecca replied steadily, though saying his name cost her. "I prepared all his filings." "And why did you leave that position?" The question she dreaded. Rebecca felt Boone tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. "Mr. Thornton made inappropriate advances. When I refused, he made it impossible for me to find other employment in town. So you fled here, insinuated yourself into a grieving widower's home." "Objection," Charlie Merritt interrupted. "Miss Wynn's employment history isn't relevant to the validity of these documents." Judge Morrison nodded. "Sustained. Stick to the facts at hand. counselor. But the damage was done. Rebecca saw it in some faces, the quick judgment, the knowing looks. Fallen woman. Gold digger. The old wounds bled fresh. It was then that Boone stood. "Your Honor, may I speak?" "This is irregular," Rowland's lawyer began. "This is my courtroom," Judge Morrison said mildly. "Mr. Mercer, proceed." "My wife Clara died 3 years ago," Boone said, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "For 3 years, I've been a ghost haunting my own life." Then Miss Wynne arrived, asking nothing but honest work for honest wages. She's brought life back to a dying place, stood against threats and intimidation, and shown more courage than most men I've known. He turned to face the crowd. "Yes, she works in my home. Yes, she keeps my books. And yes, I hope someday she'll consent to be more than that. But that's between us and God, not gossip for the entertainment of others." He pulled out a paper. "This is my will, properly witnessed, leaving the ranch to Miss Wynne should anything happen to me, because I trust her, because she's proven herself, and because Roland Haynes is a vulture who appeared only when he smelled opportunity." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison gavelled for order, but Rebecca saw something shift in his expression. The judge reviewed everything again, asked pointed questions, examined seals and signatures with a magnifying glass. Finally, he sat back. "The evidence is clear. These documents," he indicated Rowland's papers, "are amateur forgeries. Mr. Haynes, your fortunate Mr. Mercer hasn't pressed criminal charges yet." Rowland's face flushed purple. "This is about more than paper. That ranch should stay in the family." "The ranch belongs to whoever Mr. Mercer chooses," Judge Morrison said firmly. "Case dismissed. And Mr. Haynes, I suggest you leave town before Sheriff Rusk decides to investigate these forgeries more thoroughly." The gavel came down with finality. Outside the courthouse, Rowland intercepted them, his veneer of civility completely gone. "This isn't over. Accidents happen on ranches. Fires start. Women disappear." Boone stepped forward, but Rebecca caught his arm. She faced Rowland herself, drawing on every ounce of strength she'd built surviving worse men than him. "You're right. Accidents do happen, which is why I've sent copies of all documentation, including your forgeries, to the territorial marshal in Denver, along with a detailed letter explaining your threats. Should anything happen to us or the ranch, they'll know exactly where to look." It was a bluff. She'd sent no such letters yet, but Rowland didn't know that. His face went from purple to white. Sheriff Rusk appeared at their elbow. "Problem here." "No problem," Rebecca said calmly. "Mr. Haynes was just leaving. Weren't you?" Rowland looked between them all, Rebecca steady, Boone protective, Sheriff Rusk watchful, and the growing crowd of townspeople who'd heard everything. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he snarled, but the threat was empty now. They watched him stride away, his lawyer scurrying behind. The crowd began to disperse, many stopping to offer congratulations or support. Even Della Fisk managed a stiff nod of acknowledgement. "Well," Boone said quietly, "you were magnificent." "We were magnificent," Rebecca corrected. "Partners. Remember?" That evening, back at High Hollow, they sat on the bench watching sunset paint the mountains. The threat wasn't completely gone. Rowland might try something desperate, but for now, they'd won. "You know what this means," Boone said eventually. "What? No more excuses, no more delays." He turned to face her fully. "Rebecca Wynne, will you marry me? Not for the ranch, not for propriety, but because I love you and can't imagine facing another fight without you beside me." She thought of all the reasons to say no, the wounds not fully healed, the gossip that would follow, the risk of trusting again. Then she thought of his hand reaching for hers in the dark, of quiet mornings and shared laughter, of the word beautiful spoken like a prayer. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. The kiss that followed tasted of victory and promise, of battles won and peace earned. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, and the world felt full of possibility. The county courthouse was fuller than before, word having spread about the previous hearing's drama. Rebecca sat beside Boone, her ledgers and documents arranged precisely before her. She'd spent the previous evening triple-checking every entry, every date, every signature. Charlie Merritt had reviewed everything and pronounced it airtight. Judge Morrison entered with the same brisk efficiency as before. His eyes swept the courtroom. Lingering on Roland and his new lawyer, a sharp-faced man from Denver who looked like he ate foreclosures for breakfast. We're here to review the contested will of Clara Mercer. The judge began. I have examined the documents. Mr. Haynes, your counsel may proceed. The Denver lawyer stood, smooth as snake oil. Your Honor, we've uncovered new evidence that calls into question not just the will, but the very legitimacy of Mr. Mercer's claim to the ranch. Rebecca felt Boone tense beside her. This wasn't what they'd expected. The lawyer produced a sheaf of papers. Bills of sale, Your Honor, showing that certain parcels of the High Hollow land were sold to my client's family before Mrs. Mercer's death, signed by Clara Mercer herself. That's impossible, Boone said sharply. Clara would never. Let me see those documents, Judge Morrison ordered. As the papers made their way to the bench, Rebecca was already moving. She pulled out Clara's household accounts, the ones she'd studied so carefully. Her finger traced down columns of neat figures. And there was what she needed. Your Honor, she said, standing. May I approach? The judge nodded, and Rebecca brought forward the account book. These are Mrs. Mercer's household records. Note the entries for October 1880 when these sales allegedly took place. She records purchasing winter supplies, paying the ranch hands, buying medicine for a sick calf. But no mention of any land sales, not a single entry showing income from such transactions. Perhaps she kept it private, the lawyer suggested. Then explain this. Rebecca pulled out another document. The tax assessment for 1880 filed jointly by Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, declaring the ranch holdings. Every acre accounted for. Nothing sold. Filed November 1880 after these supposed sales. She was building momentum now, the skills learned in Los Alamos serving her well. And here Mrs. Mercer's letter to her sister, dated 2 weeks before her death. She mentions the ranch explicitly. Boone and I have worked so hard to keep every acre together. This land will be our children's legacy. The Denver lawyer's smooth facade cracked slightly. Letters can be forged. Then let's examine the handwriting, Rebecca interrupted. I've prepared a comparison chart. She laid out documents side by side, the alleged bills of sale. Clara's known letters, household accounts. Note the difference in the capital C's, the slant of the writing, the way the T's are crossed. Mrs. Mercer was left-handed. It affected her script. These bills of sale show right-handed penmanship. Judge Morrison leaned forward, studying the documents with renewed interest. The courtroom had gone silent, everyone straining to see. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, the bills of sale reference parcels by survey numbers that weren't established until 1882, 2 years after Mrs. Mercer's death. The territorial survey of this region wasn't completed until after she passed. Roland's face was growing redder by the minute. His lawyer frantically shuffled through papers, looking for a counterargument. Charlie Merritt stood. Your Honor, it's clear these documents are not just forgeries, but incompetent ones. We move for immediate dismissal and request that criminal charges be filed. Now wait just a minute, Roland burst out. Sit down, Mr. Haynes, Judge Morrison ordered coldly. He spent several long minutes examining the evidence Rebecca had presented, comparing documents with a magnifying glass. The courtroom held its breath. Finally, he looked up. Miss Wynne, Your analysis is remarkably thorough. Where did you receive your training? Rebecca lifted her chin. Necessity. Your Honor, when you have to protect yourself from false accusations, you learn to read documents very carefully. The judge nodded slowly. I see. He turned his attention to Roland and his lawyer. Gentlemen, I find these bills of sale to be fraudulent. Moreover, I find a pattern of attempted fraud that goes beyond civil matters into criminal territory. He gestured to Sheriff Rusk. Sheriff, please take Mr. Haynes into custody pending a full investigation. As for you, he pointed at the Denver lawyer, I'll be reporting your conduct to the Territorial Bar Association. The courtroom erupted. Roland jumped to his feet, shouting about injustice and family rights, but Sheriff Rusk was already moving. As the sheriff's deputies closed in, Roland made one last desperate play. She's a whore, he shouted, pointing at Rebecca. Threw herself at a grieving man. The ranch should stay in the family, not go to some... The crack of Judge Morrison's gavel cut him off. Mr. Haynes, you're adding contempt of court to your charges. Sheriff, get him out of here. As Roland was dragged away, still shouting, Judge Morrison addressed the courtroom. Let me be clear. The ownership of High Hollow Ranch is not in question. The late Mrs. Clara Mercer's will, properly executed and filed, stands as written. This court recognizes Mr. Boone Mercer as sole legal owner, with full rights to dispose of his property as he sees fit. He paused, looking directly at Rebecca. Miss Wynne, the court thanks you for your diligent work in exposing this fraud. You've done a service to justice today. Outside the courthouse, people crowded around to offer congratulations. Even those who'd whispered about propriety seemed impressed by Rebecca's performance. Della Fisk actually managed something approaching a smile. You showed him proper, Tilly Grant declared loudly. About time someone put that weasel in his place. Boone hadn't said much since the verdict. As the crowd thinned, he drew Rebecca aside. I don't have words. Clara would have been so pleased to see her records used to protect what we built. She kept good books, Rebecca said softly. She loved this place. It shows in every line. That evening, they returned to High Hollow to find neighbors already gathering. Word had traveled fast, and the community had decided a celebration was in order. Tables appeared in the yard, laden with food. Someone brought out a fiddle. Lanterns were strung between posts, creating pools of warm light against the darkening sky. Speech, someone called out, and others took up the cry. Boone looked uncomfortable, but he stood, raising his glass of cider. I'm not much for speeches, but I want to thank you all for standing by us, for showing up when it mattered. This land, this life, it's nothing without good neighbors. He turned to Rebecca, his voice softening. And I want to thank the woman who fought for this place like it was already hers, who brought truth to light and stood firm against lies. Rebecca Wynne, soon to be Rebecca Mercer, you've saved more than just a ranch today. You've saved a home. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes as she was embraced by woman after woman, welcomed fully into the community at last. Later, as the party wound down and stars emerged overhead, she and Boone found themselves alone by the garden plot. Someone had planted columbines while they were gone, small shoots reaching toward the sky. The Grant's girl brought them, Boone explained. Said every home needs flowers. She's right. Rebecca leaned into his side, feeling the solid warmth of him. Boone, what Roland said in court was the desperate lies of a beaten man. He finished firmly. Nothing more. People will still talk. Let them. He turned to face her, cupping her face gently. I know who you are. I know what you've overcome. That's all that matters. She kissed him then, there in the garden with the scent of earth and growing things around them. When they parted, she whispered, You're beautiful to me too, you know, the way you stood up in court, the way you've never asked me to be anything but myself. You're beautiful in all the ways that matter. He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the last lanterns flicker out, leaving only starlight. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a ranch was never easy, and Roland's arrest didn't mean all threats were gone. But tonight, they'd won more than a legal battle. They'd claimed their right to build a life together. Judgment be damned. "Ready to go in?" Boone asked eventually. In a moment, Rebecca looked up at the vast western sky, feeling small but not insignificant beneath it. "I want to remember this, all of it, the night we truly won." He squeezed her hand in understanding, and they stood together in peaceful silence. Two souls who'd found each other across years of pain and learned that sometimes the best revenge against those who would tear you down is simply to build something beautiful in spite of them. The night wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, and High Hollow Ranch settled into sleep, safe and whole and home. The final hearing arrived on a crisp morning that promised winter. Rebecca wore her best dress, the blue one, carefully mended so the patches barely showed with the silver columbine comb in her hair. Beside her, Boone sat straight and solemn in his good suit, the one that still smelled faintly of cedar from storage. Charlie Merritt had prepared them well. "Just present the truth," he'd said. "The evidence speaks for itself." Judge Morrison called the court to order with his usual efficiency. Roland sat at the defendant's table, his fine clothes replaced by jail attire, his swagger diminished but not gone. The territorial prosecutor, a stern man named Edwards, had taken over the case. "We're here to address the matter of fraud and forgery in the case of the High Hollow Ranch deed dispute," Judge Morrison announced. "Mr. Edwards, you may begin." The prosecutor laid out the case methodically. The forged will, the falsified bills of sale, the attempted arson, the threats. But it was when he called Rebecca to testify that the courtroom truly paid attention. "Miss Wynne," Edwards began, "please tell the court how you identified these forgeries." Rebecca stood, her voice clear and steady. She explained about the dates, the handwriting, the impossible survey numbers. She showed Clara's original letters, comparing them line by line with the forgeries. Her testimony was precise, factual, irrefutable. "And how did you come to possess such analytical skills?" Edwards asked. "When you've had to defend yourself against false accusations. Sir, you learn to pay attention to details. Documentation becomes your shield." Roland's lawyer, a public defender now, his Denver counsel, having fled, tried to shake her testimony. "Isn't it true you have a vested interest in this outcome, that Mr. Mercer has promised to marry you?" "Yes," Rebecca said simply. "But my analysis stands regardless. Numbers don't lie, dates don't change, and dead men don't notarize documents." A ripple of appreciation went through the courtroom. Even Judge Morrison's mouth twitched toward a smile. When Boone took the stand, he spoke plainly about Clara's love for the ranch, her careful management, her dreams for its future. He produced her final letter, the real one, not Roland's fabrication. "My wife wrote this the week before she died," he said, his voice rough with controlled emotion. "She says, keep the ranch whole. Boone, it's our life's work, our future. Let it continue to grow and shelter those who need it." He looked directly at Roland. She meant it to be a home, not a prize for vultures. The truth emerged in pieces throughout the day. Roland had debts from failed mining ventures. He'd heard about Boone's isolation after Clara's death and thought him an easy mark. The hired thugs testified in exchange for leniency, revealing Roland's plans to force Boone out through intimidation if legal means failed. When the testimony concluded, Judge Morrison didn't even retire to chambers. "I've heard enough," he declared. "Roland Haynes, you are found guilty of forgery, fraud, attempted arson, and conspiracy. I sentence you to 5 years in territorial prison and order you to pay restitution for all legal costs incurred." Roland erupted. "That ranch belongs to family, not to some fallen woman who—" Silence. Judge Morrison's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Mr. Haynes, your definition of family seems limited to those you can exploit. I see more true family in this courtroom, neighbors who stood guard, a community that rallied to justice, than in your grasping entitlement. He turned to Boone and Rebecca. Mr. Mercer, Miss Wynne, this court apologizes for the distress you've endured. The ranch is yours, free and clear, and may you prosper on it. As Roland was led away, he shot one last venomous look at Rebecca, but she didn't flinch. She'd faced worse men and survived. This was just one more ghost laid to rest. Outside the courthouse, the celebration was subdued but heartfelt. People shook hands, offered congratulations, spoke of justice served. But Rebecca noticed Boone's quietness, the way his eyes kept returning to her. "What is it?" she asked as they climbed into the wagon. "I was thinking about Clara's letter, about sheltering those who need it." He took her hand. "She would have liked knowing the ranch gave you sanctuary when you needed it, that something good came from our loss." They drove home in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of endings and beginnings. But as they crested the hill that brought High Hollow into view, they found another surprise waiting. The yard was full of wagons and people. For a moment, Rebecca's heart clenched. Had Roland's friends come for revenge? But then she recognized the faces. Neighbors, all of them, with tools and lumber and purposeful expressions. "What's all this?" Boone called out. Herbert Grant stepped forward, grinning. "Figured you two have had enough fighting for a while. Thought we'd help put things right before winter sets in proper." They'd brought everything needed for repairs. New boards for the barn Roland's men had damaged, glass for windows cracked by thrown rocks, paint for walls scorched by the attempted fire, even seeds for the garden plot where the columbines grew. "We can't accept all this," Rebecca protested. "Sure you can," Tilly Grant said firmly. "This is what neighbors do. Besides, we figure there'll be a wedding here soon enough. Place ought to look proper for that." The work went quickly with so many hands. Men repaired and reinforced while women cleaned and organized. Children ran between the workers, carrying tools and water, their laughter brightening the autumn air. Even Copper, ancient as he was, seemed energized by the activity. As the sun began to sink, the ranch looked better than it had in years. The barn stood straight and strong, the house gleamed with fresh paint, and the garden plot was ready for spring planting. It was as if the community had collectively decided to erase Roland's shadow from the place. "Thank you," Boone said when the work was done, his voice thick. "All of you. This means more than I can say. You'd do the same for any of us." Elias said simply, "Have done. In fact, remember the winter my barn burned? You were the first one there with lumber and labor." As the neighbors departed, calling out final congratulations and promises to return for the wedding, Rebecca and Boone stood together surveying their domain. The ranch that had seemed so desolate when she first arrived now looked like what it was, a home. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You're beautiful," he replied. And when she turned to him in surprise, he was smiling, standing up in that courtroom, facing down lies with truth, fighting for this place like it was already yours, which it is, you know, has been since the day you brought that dead plant back to life. She kissed him then, there in the yard of their ranch, with the mountains as witness and the evening star just beginning to shine. When they parted, she whispered, "Say it again." "You're beautiful to me," he said, the words coming easier now. "In every way that matters, in every way there is." They went inside together, to the kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and lemon oil, to the fire that crackled with warmth and welcome. Rebecca made coffee while Boone brought in the ledgers, not for legal battles now, but for planning. Winter feed to order, fences to check before snow, normal ranch business that felt like a luxury after so much conflict. "We should set a date," Boone said suddenly, "for the wedding, before something else tries to interfere." Rebecca laughed. "Practical as always, but yes, let's..." How about next month give us time to prepare, but not enough time for trouble to find us? Next month it is. He reached across the table to take her hand. Rebecca, I want you to know if you want to change anything about the ranch, about how we do things, you should. This is your home now, your life, not just Clara's shadow. She squeezed his fingers. I don't want to erase her. Boone, she's part of what made this place, made you, but maybe we can add to what she started. Build on the foundation she laid. Like the columbines in the garden, new growth from prepared soil. Exactly. They sat together as night deepened, planning their future with the same careful attention they'd given to fighting their battles. Outside, the first stars emerged in the clear Colorado sky. Inside, two people who'd learned that love could wound and heal in equal measure chose to believe in tomorrow. The lamp burned low as they talked, their voices mixing with the settling sounds of the house. Somewhere in the walls, a mouse scratched in the yard. Copper barked once at shadows, small sounds of life continuing, of home being more than a building, being a promise kept and a future claimed. When they finally parted for the night, Boone caught Rebecca's hand one more time. Thank you, he said simply, for fighting, for staying, for seeing something worth saving in a broken-down ranch and a broken-down rancher. We saved each other, she replied. That's what partners do. The word hung between them, rich with meaning. Partners in law, partners in life, partners in the daily work of building something beautiful from the ashes of what was lost. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight they were safe. They were home, and they were together. And in a land that could be harsh and unforgiving. That was no small miracle. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold, frost painting the grass silver. Reverend Ames arrived early, his Bible tucked under one arm and a smile creasing his weathered face. He'd married Boone and Clara in this same spot 8 years ago, and now he'd come to bless another beginning. Under the cottonwood, he asked, gesturing to the massive tree that had sheltered the ranch house for longer than anyone could remember. Clara loved that tree, Boone said quietly. Seemed fitting to start our new life where the old one grew. Rebecca emerged from the house in her blue dress, now adorned with new lace Tilly Grant had insisted on adding. The silver columbine comb caught the morning light in her dark hair. She carried no flowers. The columbines in the garden had finished blooming, but she didn't need them. The joy in her face was ornament enough. Only a handful of witnesses had gathered the Grants. Charlie Merritt and his wife, and old Copper, who'd positioned himself where he could watch the proceedings with clouded but attentive eyes. They'd wanted it simple, intimate, a contrast to all the public battles they'd fought. Reverend Ames opened his Bible, but before he could begin, Boone spoke. Reverend, if you don't mind, we'd like to say our own words first. The minister nodded, stepping back slightly. Boone took Rebecca's hands in his, calloused fingers gentle against her work-worn palms. Rebecca Wynne, he began, his voice rough with emotion. You came to this ranch looking for shelter and ended up sheltering me instead. You brought life back to dead things, plants, hopes, and a man who'd forgotten how to live. I promise to honor your strength, protect your gentleness, and remind you every day that you're beautiful to me in all the ways that matter. Rebecca's eyes shimmered with tears, but her voice was steady. Boone Mercer, you offered me safety when the world felt dangerous, respect when others offered only judgment. You saw me not as something broken to be fixed or used, but as someone worth standing beside. I promise to tend this life we're building with the same care I'd give any growing thing, with patience, faith, and the knowledge that the strongest roots grow in the hardest soil. Reverend Ames cleared his throat, touched despite years of witnessing vows. Well then, by the power vested in me by God and the territory of Colorado, I pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined, let no one tear asunder. The kiss was brief, sweet, witnessed by friends and the endless Colorado sky. Tilly wiped her eyes while Herbert clapped Boone on the shoulder. Charlie produced a bottle of good whiskey for toasting, and even Copper thumped his tail against the ground in apparent approval. They shared a simple meal on the porch bread Rebecca had baked that morning. Ham from the Grant smokehouse, preserves from last summer's fruit. The conversation was easy, punctuated by laughter and the comfortable silences of people who knew each other well. "Never thought I'd see the day," Herbert said, raising his glass again. Boone Mercer smiling like a fool in love. "Never thought I'd be one," Boone admitted, his arm around Rebecca's waist. "But here we are." As afternoon approached, the guests took their leave, each offering quiet congratulations and promises to help with whatever might be needed. Soon, it was just the three of them, Boone, Rebecca, and Copper in the yard of their ranch. "Mrs. Mercer," Boone said, testing the words. "How does it feel?" "Like coming home," Rebecca replied. "Like I've been traveling a long, hard road and finally found where I'm meant to be." They spent the rest of the day in quiet activity. Boone carved their initials into the bench he'd built, BM plus RM, 1,883 inches, while Rebecca wrote the first entry in a new journal. "Today begins our life together. The house breathes easy." As evening fell, they sat by the fire, planning. Not grand schemes or legal strategies, but simple things. Expanding the vegetable garden, maybe getting some chickens that actually laid eggs regularly, teaching some of the town children to ride in exchange for help with chores. "I want to invite the school group out here in spring," Rebecca said. "Show them the columbines, teach them about the plants that survive out here. Clara would have liked that, I think." "She would have," Boone agreed. "She always said knowledge was meant to be shared." They talked about possibly adding a room not for hired help now, but for the family they hoped to have. The empty bedroom that had held too much grief might someday hold a cradle instead. It was a tender hope, spoken softly, but spoken nonetheless. "Whatever comes," Rebecca said, "we'll face it together." Together, Boone echoed, the word a promise and a prayer. Night settled over High Hollow Ranch like a benediction. In the barn, horses drowsed in their stalls. In the garden, new shoots pushed through cold soil, dormant but alive. And in the house, two people who'd learned that love wasn't about perfection but about choosing each other again and again settled into their first night as husband and wife. Boone opened Clara's drawer one last time, not in grief but in gratitude. He placed her last letter on the mantel, not hidden away but honored, part of the story that had led them here. The past wasn't erased but integrated, woven into the fabric of their new beginning. "She brought us together, in a way," Rebecca said softly. Understanding the gesture, "I think she would have chosen you." Boone replied, "If she'd had a say in who should care for this place. For me, she had a gift for seeing what people could become." They prepared for bed with the easy rhythm of a couple who'd already learned each other's patterns. Rebecca brushed out her hair while Boone banked the fire. The simple domesticity of it after all the drama and danger felt like its own miracle. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows they'd reinforced together, but inside was warmth and safety, and the quiet breathing of a house at peace. Copper sighed in his corner, settling into dreams of younger days. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, marking the moments of this new chapter. "Rebecca," Boone said into the darkness. "Yes, you're beautiful to me, still, always." She smiled against his shoulder. "And you to me. Now hush and sleep. Tomorrow we have a ranch to run." But neither slept immediately. Instead, they lay listening to the night sounds of their land coyotes calling in the distance, wind singing through the cottonwood leaves, the settling of a house that had weathered storms and would weather more. They'd fought for this moment, earned it through courage and truth and the willingness to trust despite past wounds. Dawn would come soon enough, bringing the endless work of ranch life. There would be challenges, drought and storm, market prices and predators. The 1,000 natural shocks that ranching was heir to, but they would face them as they'd learned to face everything together, with quiet strength and the knowledge that something beautiful could grow even in the harshest ground. The columbines in the garden would bloom again come spring, delicate but enduring, proof that life persists. And in the ranch house that had known such sorrow, two hearts beat in rhythm, writing a new story on the vast canvas of the Colorado sky. High Hollow Ranch slept and dreamed of tomorrow. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this journey through the Wild West, where love blooms even in the harshest soil. We hope Rebecca and Boone's story touched your heart as it did ours. Where are you listening to this tale tonight? Share in the comments below whether you're in a bustling city or quiet countryside. We'd love to know where our stories travel. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, redemption, and romance from the American frontier. What did you think of Rebecca's strength and Boone's transformation? Let us know your thoughts. Your comments help us craft the stories you want to hear. Until next time, may you find your own High Hollow Ranch, wherever that may be.